So, welcome to Unbelievable Reality Podcast. I am Roy Arthur, and off we go. Today's podcast is going to be a combination of topics. Kind of as usual, I have a tendency to do that, cover a lot of ground, all in one sitting, in an attempt to try to get you, the viewer, to be able to understand the spider web of the complexity of the spider web of the world that we currently live in, and how that affects us, just the normies, on a regular basis, and how it always seems to come home to the average citizen, whether that's in the United States or England or Russia or China or Japan or any country in the world. It is always the majority of the populace, the lower income, that suffer from the decision making of the elite. And that, I have a copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor, perhaps the greatest of all time, or maybe it's just that we have the best historical record on him. But you read Meditations by Aurelius and you realize that the human condition has changed very little in the last 2,000 years. Yeah, we've shuffled the deck on different religiosities, different mythologies, if you will, and different forms of governance, different forms of everything, to be honest: transportation, engineering, farming, etc. But people, actual human beings, have changed very little in 2,000 years, which I find quite ridiculous, to be honest, especially in today's what's supposed to be considered enlightened world. I mean, really, if you think about it, we have right now at our fingertips the most information in the history of the world. Any person can access more information today than the highest level of society accessed just a mere 50 years ago. I mean, which is going to bring up a topic that I want to hit on in regards to the surveillance state and the unbelievably rapid expansion of the surveillance state in this country, and how that's a two-edged sword, people. I think we're all getting kind of lost in them watching us, but we need to start thinking more about, okay, turnabout is fair play, right? So how do we start watching them? Yeah, food for thought. Anyway, just always like to refer to some sort of literature. Once again, a dying tradition in the world today. People simply don't take the time, or have the time, or want the time to sit down and read. There's been so many studies on how much reading helps your brain, helps your regulation, helps you function in society, that I won't go into them here. But to me, all of my children read. I have 5 of them, so I might know a bit about what I'm talking about. And it's been a huge thing since they were little. I believe I'm self-educated. I've said that in previous podcasts. Yours truly is a high school graduate that somehow managed to make his way into the world and become, by our terminology, wealthy. But I did that all because I read. And I sit in my library, in my office / library, surrounded by literature, the books that I have retained, not including all of the books that I've read and given away. At our fingertips today is the answer to any question that you might have, pretty much about almost any situation. Do your due diligence. Don't take the first opinion. Get a second or a third or a fourth opinion before you arrive at a conclusion. If more people actually did that, and as opposed to just assuming that the first thing they heard on social media had to be correct, we'd probably avoid a bunch of the tomfuckery that we're currently dealing with. To that point, I have to pull a mea culpa right now and admit that I talked about something in previous posts on Instagram and TikTok that, although it's true, it's not entirely true. And what I'm talking about is I'm talking about the mandate as of June 1st, 2027, that there must be biometric sensors in all new cars sold in the United States. That is in the transportation part of the Biden administration's bill, the Save America Act, I believe is what it was. There is a provision in there that requires that. In an attempt, once again misguided attempt, to legislate our way out of people driving drunk or under the influence. But here's the catch. That legislation is actually pointed at, I can't remember the actual synonym for it, it's NAARCP. It's the National Automobile Regulatory Commission that has to approve the guidance and the rules and the technology to implement into our vehicles for that biometric sensor system to actually function correctly. At this point, that has not occurred. They have not even approved the rules for the regulations, much less had the authority to implement the technology. What does that mean? What that means is that on January 1st, 2027, not every vehicle sold in the United States is going to have monitoring of your blood pressure, your eye twitch movements, whether you're slack-jawed or you scooted down too far in the seat, all that shit. There's already a bunch of fucking technology in vehicles today. I just rented a Kia to go up to Colorado to visit my son, and I had it on cruise control, and I'm whipping along at 83 miles an hour, and every time I came up on a car to pass it, the car started slowing down. And it took me a few minutes to realize what was going on. That was the sensors overriding the cruise control that I had set in order for the car to stay at a safe distance from the vehicle I was trying to pass. That right there shows you a major flaw in the technology, which is one of the problems that the Automobile Commission is struggling with right now, is the tech don't match the legislation. God, where have I heard that before? That's so unlike our government to actually pass a law and then not be able to actually fucking enforce it. Or to enforce a law that actually doesn't exist. Or to create a private police force just because the executive branch said that we could. And right now, our branch of government, which would be the House of Representatives and the Senate, is ballless and unable to protect us from an oligarch and an autocratic fascist. I digressed, didn't I? Oops. Yeah, long story short, government isn't always up to the job. There are times, though, when our government is up to the job, and boy, do Republicans fucking hate that. Especially Republican business owners. Everybody wants to rule the world, right? Well, the rich really, really want to get richer. Back to the beginning of the podcast. I'm a huge reader. Today, I just started a book called American Colossus. This is the history of capitalism from 1865, right after the Civil War, to 1900, which was the Industrial Revolution, really, going bananas. That was the advent of the railroad tycoons and the steel tycoons and the coal tycoons and soon to be the oil tycoons and the sugar tycoons and on and on and on. After the eradication of the South, there was no more cotton kings, so they just switched gears and went into different industries. But this explains how the world changed in that 35-year period of time. And right below that is a book called Theodore Rex, which is all about Teddy Roosevelt, who's a mixed bag, as is all political leaders in this country, it seems. Devout white nationalist, racist to the core, but also responsible for saving more of our public lands than any president before or since. You take the good with the bad. Martin Luther King. Great guy, said great things, had great ideas, was an absolute drunk and a philanderer. What are you gonna do? You don't get it all, because there is no such thing as perfect when it comes to humanity, except in movies and on television. In real life, nobody. Everybody has warts. Get used to it. Accept it and deal with it. There is no perfect, and there's not gonna be, although so many are trying so desperately to make that happen. Let's talk about a couple of points while we have a minute. News just came out this Wednesday that the United States just surpassed $40 trillion in national debt. The size of the number is so staggering that normal people just simply can't comprehend it. As a matter of fact, abnormal people cannot comprehend it, because that number is so big it's impossible to get your mind around. But the bottom line with that number is the United States, and the United States added $1 trillion. This regime added $1 trillion in debt in 5 months of 2026. In just the last 5 months. When they say out of control spending, fuck. I'd like to have that credit card. I'm sure you would too. But we don't. I mean, if you don't have a 720 credit rating, try to go to your bank and get a loan to do anything. Try to start a new business with less than a 720. You get laughed out the door. But our government borrows freely with no consequences, and apparently no interest in paying the debt off. And here's the concerning thing about that $40 trillion debt number. That's just the government. Now, when you add in private debt, these numbers, I've got to look away here because they're on my computer screen, but these numbers also add on to that 40 trillion. Student loans, another 1.7 trillion. Credit cards, personal credit cards, another 1.3 trillion. Auto loans, another 1.8 trillion. And then the biggest is mortgages. Right now, there's $13 trillion in mortgages alone. That's debt. Those are loans. That's money that needs to be paid back. Think about that. The cumulative total debt for the country is $82 trillion. Which is 235% of the annual GDP. Which leads one to believe that that debt is never going to get repaid. And that no one intends to repay that debt. How do you get rid of debt? In the case of countries, a war usually helps. For the most part, the way the United States has always come out of a recession or a depression is by getting into a fucking war. Because we increase defense spending, and then all that spreads out through our economy, and that's how we've survived every other recession and depression in the past. Since we're already in an undeclared war with Iran, we don't have to look far to see how they plan on possibly fixing the debt problem. The problem is, it isn't going to work this time. Because little Petey Hegseth, makes me insane to call this guy the Secretary of War. a bigger wannabe. The only better collection of bigger wannabes is ICE than Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth actually ought to be in charge of ICE, because those are the same old high school football quarterbacks trying to relive their glory days 20 years later with a beer belly. He'd fit in great with those idiots and blowhards. Blowhard is an 18th century term. I'm sorry I used it, but that dated me. Anyway, the point of the matter is, this country's not the richest country in the world. We might potentially, and it seems like we are, the most in debt country in the world, which runs counter to the narrative that has been sold to the American public for the last 50 years. We're not the richest country in the world. No, we might be the richest in resources and in possibilities and in the future of technologies, but in terms of money on the table, sorry, that's not us. Which brings me to another point. There's another $3 trillion that's been added to the debt pile by the explosion of AI and this out of control build out of data centers nationwide. Right now, if you live in Virginia or Georgia, good luck. Yeah, Georgia being a Republican state that kicked the doors wide open with tax incentives, tax breaks. Shit, they even offered up their own electrical grid for free. If Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, etc., Oracle, all came there and started building data centers. So boy, they sure did. The only problem is there's not enough electricity in the archaic electrical grid in Georgia to supply the power needed for these data centers. So what they're doing instead is burning natural gas, which is emitting more carbons, more dioxides, more nasty shit into our environment, specifically in the state of Georgia. So when you go outside to breathe that fresh Georgia air, it's not. And it isn't gonna be until somebody does something about this, and nobody is gonna do anything about this. So Georgia and Virginia, just get used to living in a really polluted state where your life expectancy is most likely dropped by 3 to 10 years, depending on how close you are to the most local data center. But the $3 trillion in debt for the AI race might very well be the straw that breaks the camel's back, in my opinion, because the way that $3 trillion in debt is being funded is by circle financing. What is circle financing? We hear everybody talk about this circular financing group. It's really simple. This is a great example because this just happened last week with the most overvalued company other than Tesla in the world, which is SpaceX. SpaceX just borrowed $500 billion from NVIDIA to buy chips from NVIDIA and give the money back. That's circular financing. In a nutshell, I loan you the money out of my own revenue to turn around and buy my product. And then NVIDIA is invested in SpaceX's stock to support the company and to keep it afloat. Do you see how that all works? That's circular financing. And in a lot of ways, the SpaceX IPO, as I've spoke on many times before, and this circular financing scheme, which is what it is, you could call it a Ponzi scheme, a pyramid scheme, whatever you want to call it. It's still a scheme. It is. Period. There's no way around it. But it is a perfect microcosm of how this country works. how capitalism actually has, what capitalism has turned into now. There used to be a time before the 70s when corporations grew, their profits grew, the corporation grew because they built good shit. So if I had the choice between buying a washer and dryer from GE or Kenmore, I would buy the one that had the best reputation. Not the cheapest one, not the easiest to get, the one with the best reputation for reliability and quality. That was the deal with capitalism up until the 70s, was that businesses grew, they were taxed heavily, 30, 40, 50, shit, in some cases 90% on corporations and individuals, which made sure that the people that worked at those corporations got paid a living wage. But companies grew because they made good shit. Starting in the 70s, but really rocking and rolling in the 80s, with deregulation, with the ability to buy back stocks, that whole narrative changed. And what became the centerpiece of capitalism was really simple. How much money can we make? Not how good is our shit anymore. Not how well do we take care of our workers anymore. How much money can the company, and more importantly, the C-suite, and what that means is the upper level management in a corporation, how much money can we make? And if you look at the disparity between CEO, C-suite pay, and worker wages since the early 1980s, the graph goes like this. That would be CEO pay, that would be worker pay. Because with that change in philosophy also came about the destructions of unions. I mean, you don't even know how many millions and billions of dollars big business has spent to crush unions, to get rid of, to eliminate pension funds. That's why you have a 401k today. You think a 401k is this nifty great idea for your retirement fund. No, it's bullshit. It's you paying for yourself out of a wage that's below where it should be. And then if you're lucky, your corporation that you work for that's sucking the veritable life out of you will match your contribution. If you can afford to make a contribution. See, that's the trick. Now the company doesn't have to fund a retirement plan for you without you contributing. They put it on us to pay for our own retirement, to pay for our own futures, so that they could make more money and they could sell us shittier products. And so also along those lines, which we're not going to cover in this podcast, but will in the next, that's when the great offshoring began. Because it made sense for the corporations who only wanted to make money, to increase shareholder value. You hear that all the time. Shareholder value and CEO pay. Here's a news flash for you. 80% of shareholder value is held by the upper 10% in the United States. That number is actually 90% is owned by 10%. And of that 10%, 1% owns 37% of all wealth in this country. And that is why capitalism is failing. That is American capitalism beginning to eat itself. That is why we're seeing subscription services, and you have to have a subscription service in your new car to turn on the seat warmer that came in the car that you bought that you thought you owned. That's another microcosm. What does all this mean? What it all means, it brings us back to the beginning of this podcast. The debt news that just came out on Wednesday should make everybody stop and think real hard. Because as individuals, we know on a personal level that we can't borrow indefinitely. If we run our credit cards up, they shut them off. If we don't pay our car loan, they come and take it. If we can't pay our mortgages, they come and get our house and leave us on the street, which is part of the homelessness crisis right now. But corporations don't play by the same rules. And the corporations are following our government's lead. And that's why this is such a clusterfuck right now. And why we're the ones left holding the bag. Once again, this is our unbelievable reality, and this is my podcast. I'm Roy Arthur. If you don't like what I have to say, well, then don't fucking watch. If you do, get a set, drop a comment, share to a friend, and subscribe. Also, check me out on Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, and Patreon. As always, we'll talk again.